Good day, Patrick. Thank you for joining me on the Sami Parvez show. It is nice to have you.
Thank you very much, Sami. It's a real
Yeah,
pleasure to be here.
thank you, sir. And how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great. The campaign's in full steam, and we're picking up votes every day. So there's 1 week left, so we're in the final push.
hmm So, how do you see the support you are receiving, or particularly door knocking? Do you think you are going to make a big impact in this election?
We believe so. My riding, Spadina-Fort York, is in the heart of downtown Toronto, and Toronto's a city that used to be on the move, and now it's anything but. And and I'm hearing that from voters. And why is that? And the reason why is because the Ford government doesn't care about Toronto's vote. It doesn't need Toronto's vote. And because doesn't need Toronto's vote, he doesn't act in Toronto's interests. And that's what I'm hearing. The result is a global city, the economic engine of Canada, the economic engine of Ontario's economy, uh, and it's being brought to its knees by chronic provincial neglect.
hmm
Toronto can't afford to deliver the services that we all need. All the crises that we're confronting, housing, affordability, the cost of living, infrastructure, mental health, tariff threats, etc. Toronto doesn't have the equipment. We saw in last week's snowstorm. It doesn't even have the infrastructure to be able to deal with a snowstorm emergency, let alone the chronic housing crisis. And that's because the Ford government is underfunding Toronto and bringing it to its knees because he doesn't need Toronto's vote. He's acting for those who vote for him, and he's leaving the rest of Ontario behind. And we all need to pivot, but we also need governments that we can trust to act in the public good, not in favor of private interests. And we need a government that is a responsible government, a government that acts in the name of the public, not in private interests. And we need politicians that we can trust. And there's an institutional failure occurring all across the board with our public institutions, whether it's healthcare, our educational system, our university system, our ability to build housing, our ability to care for each other. These are all affected. Canada is built with public institutions that are designed to deliver what we need. It's not like the United States. We need our public institutions. And Ford has been systematically dismantling them and privatizing them, hoping that his economy, the market, will solve all solutions. And it's clearly the evidence is not. We've had a time-honored system of government that is built to protect the public good. That's based on trust. Ford is now being charged with being investigated for abuse of public trust. That's the criminal offense that he's being investigated for. Now, and people don't trust him to deal with this American threat. We don't need a strong man in power. We need strong government and begin to start to heal all the damage that he's done.
hmm
That's what I'm hearing at the door,
hmm
and it's a very riding specific message, right? This is Toronto speaking, not rural Ontario in my writing, not a suburban Ontario, but Toronto's been left behind, and so have its residents,
hmm As
and we
you
see
said,
how
yeah,
every day,
go ahead.
you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, as you said, like people lost trust in government and their institution, particularly to politician. As myself, like I have decided that I'm going to decline my vote. I have told like any guest like appeared here, like because like I know like the premier or the government or my representative in the legislative assembly or in the house of common, they either they don't care about me or they don't have the power to help me out in the situation. And we are also know like the voter turnout is always low, like majority of Canadians or Ontarians don't go to the polls. So what do you suggest, or I need to know like what should be done to encourage Ontarians or Canadians to get out and vote, vote, vote?
Well, this turned out to be initially this was a meaningless election that Ford called just to uh, solidify his power base. But it's turning out to be a very critical election with what's happening south of the border
Mm-hmm,
uh, because Canada is under threat, our sovereignty is under threat, our economy is under threat. Uh, and I think people know that, and people are deeply anxious. We've been anxious for 7 years, at least 7 years, about housing and healthcare, affordability, et cetera. But now we're anxious about the threats to our sovereignty. And so I would expect we're going to see a higher turnout. People are mobilized. We saw it in the hockey game last night.
mm-hmm, yeah.
Things are at stake here. I think big things are at stake. Our national identity is at stake. Our autonomy is at stake, and our economic well-being is at stake.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people know that. So I would expect we're going to see a higher turnout.
Mm-hmm. Okay, if there would be a higher turnout, that's great. Like everyone should get out and vote, 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 and particularly to a smaller party, not like a PC or Liberal or NDP. Like they always have been in power and they did nothing. Like change does not come from those folks would be in the power. What I believe. So, like, I need to ask you one thing with respect to wage theft, which has not been highlighted, but I'm trying to get it highlighted on my podcast particularly, and I'm working on a story for the Central newspaper. That the wage theft is happening particularly in Ontario because I never heard it when I was living in Saskatchewan for 7 years, and there are companies like such as Simplify Supply Chain Solution or Dutchies, or there could be some other restaurants. Even though someone told me that he got trained, like it means he was trained, I don't know like for how many hours, he was not paid for it. And we have rules and regulation, we have labor laws, the books are full with the rules, but it seems like when it comes to practically they are not being enforced. So what should be done, or I need to ask you like if you get elected as an MPP, what would you differently to make sure that these rules should be enforced practically, and whenever a company found guilty for breaching labor law must receive the biggest or the toughest penalties.
Well, wage theft is uh, a relatively new problem in Ontario. We didn't used to have wage theft.
Hmm.
We also didn't used to have homelessness to the extent that we have now. And we also didn't used to have waiting lists, and people had family doctors. With respect to wage theft, the reason why it's occurring is because, as you say, we have laws on the books, we have labor boards, we have employment standards officers. Those laws and regulations aren't being enforced. And the reason why they're not being enforced is because the Ford government is stripping down our public institutions and our independent agencies. The labor boards and employment standards officials aren't the only administrative officials and agencies that are unable to enforce the obligations that are imposed upon them to enforce the law. And so we need to restaff, refinance, rehire uh, employment standards officials, enforcement officers, and enforce our labor laws. The laws are already in the books. It's illegal. They should be fined. The workers should get their salaries and income and be compensated for not having it for such a long time. All those laws are there. They're just not being enforced by the government. So the question is, why isn't the government enforcing these laws? Why is it stripping down our labor boards and employment standards and human rights tribunal
Mhm.
and the public service, the civil service, et cetera, et cetera? Uh, Canada is a country that depends on these public institutions. And the public institutions that we have, whether it's publicly funded healthcare, is the lodestar of Canada's identity internationally. And yet we don't really have a publicly funded healthcare system in Ontario. And the government's solution is to privatize it even more. So we need to build back our institutions. Generations and generations of Ontarians built those institutions. They are a political achievement and really define who Ontario is, who Ontarians are, and what our system of government is. And we're headed down the road to privatization, where corporations are vested with the responsibility of building housing, where corporations are vested with the responsibility of delivering healthcare. And the distributional consequences are appalling. Uh, the Ford government has not built a single house in 7 years. It relies on the market. Uh, when you ask Ford what he wants to do about the housing crisis, he says we need to protect our economy. We need to build up the market because the market is the answer. But the market is not the answer, and we know that. Look at the failures that the market has delivered. Markets are great for some things. This is a difference between the NDP and the Green Party.
Mhm.
The NDP is ideologically opposed to free markets. Their default position is state regulation. The court conservatives are ideologically opposed to public governance. Their default position is the market. And so their policies are geared around protecting the market. The NDP's policies are geared around protecting public investment and taxes, tax and spend. And the Greens are not ideologically committed to markets or state action. They're tools that we use to deliver certain goods. Sometimes markets work. Markets work on housing when partnered with government, but government has to build too. And you can't just trust that, right?
Mm.
And other public goods like healthcare, uh, markets aren't good for healthcare. The best delivery of healthcare, as Canadians know, is a publicly funded healthcare system. And so we need to enhance OHIP. We need to enhance OHIP so OHIP covers mental health issues. We have to pay out of pocket for mental health issues. And relying on the market is incredibly damaging. My son, at the age of 12, uh, uh, transitioned his gender. He's trans now, and the community didn't receive it well. Let's put it that way.
Mm.
And it was too much for him to handle. And within a year, he was a meth addict. At 14 years old, he overdosed 3 times. They found him once on a subway train at the end of the line, overdosed. Uh, Police were coming to our house. We finally were able to put him in a private institute, not a private institution, Pine River Institute. For close to 2 years, he was institutionalized with full supports. He finished his high school degree. Now he's 19. He's clean. He's doing fantastically. But he's a success story. And it cost us an incredible amount of money. And were we not in a position to be able to afford that, he would probably be dead. So, we need all sorts of supports. We need uh, mental health step up supports for people experiencing mental health problems to bring them slowly into institutions where they get care. And then as they heal, we need step down institutions to bring them back. All we have is in my riding, all we have is we don't have anything, right? So you see a teen on the streets in downtown Toronto, um, clearly distressed. Their parents have gone through hell,
Mm-hmm.
and their parents can't take care of them
Yep.
anymore. And there's nothing there to take care of him. We
Mm-hmm.
need to start taking care of people.
Yep.
And and in my riding that plays out differently than it does in rural Ontario. But in my riding, it's clear what we need. We need a resurgence, a restoration of public trust in public institutions
Mm-hmm.
to really deliver uh, public goods. And we need to pivot our economy from Doug Ford's economy, which is an industrialized economy,
Mm-hmm.
to a post-industrial green economy.
Yep.
Uh,
Okay.
with
So sorry. So let's jump to another topic, like with respect to housing, as you already brought it up. Like we see, like there is a great crisis of housing in Ontario, and also like there is huge crisis of homelessness. So what's your plan to tackle it down for your party and yourself? Like what's your, like how would you deal it, like if you get elected or if your party comes in power?
the Green Party has a fully costed platform, and with respect to housing, we're uh, planning to build 2 million homes in 10 years, 300,000 nonprofit and co-op homes. Uh, we're going to extend rent controls right across the board. I think it's 2018 is the cutoff date for rent controls. Any new builds, there are no rent controls whatsoever. So we want to extend rent controls right across to all new builds. We want to end and tackle corruption and speculation in the housing market. Uh, Speculation from uh, uh, buyers. In my riding, it's mostly condos that are used for investment purposes and not for housing purposes. Uh, and we want to build supports around those houses for people who need them. If they're looking for work, if they need health care, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got an effective plan uh, to solve the housing crisis. But it requires not only the private sector, it requires Ontario and Toronto to start building houses again.
Hmm. Okay. And with respect to, we also have like healthcare crisis and also cost of living. Let's first of all talk about cost of living. I think your party supports universal basic income, right?
We do. There
Yeah,
was a
you
pilot
do.
project in Ontario several years ago, and it was successful.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a number of Nordic countries that have basic incomes, and they're successful. They get people off the street, they get people in homes, and they empower people to find work. It doesn't turn the economy, it doesn't turn citizens into passive
Mm-hmm.
receivers of income. It energizes them and it activates them. The Green
So
Party also wants to end legislative poverty
yeah.
by doubling disability payments uh, and uh, and the like. So
So could you please explain like who should receive the universal basic income? Should every single Ontarians receive it, or who are just unemployed or having disability, or they are very like like lower the threshold of income?
well, I don't think Galen Weston should receive a basic income, and I don't think other CEOs of Ontario corporations should receive a basic income. But that's just, that's just my reaction to your question. I think we would need to turn that policy question over to experts to
Mhm.
design the best program, whether it's tailored to the working class or a certain minimum level of family income or household income. I think those are details that really need to be debated
Hmm.
in the legislature
Yep.
and sorted out at the level of policy. But in
Yep.
terms of the principle,
Yep.
uh, the Green Party is in favor of it.
Hmm. Yeah, I heard it. So this is not mentioned in your platform at this time. There should be a universal basic income.
It's in the Green Party platform. It's in
Is
our
it?
2025 platform.
Yeah, but okay, okay, but it is not mentioned like who should receive it, and how it should receive it. Like it is not like elaborated that who is eligible for it.
No, it's kind of like bike lanes.
Hmm.
Now we'll figure out where they should go after consultation, and we'll probably make some mistakes.
Hmm.
Um, but when you're in favor of bike lanes, it doesn't mean you're in favor of them running down University Avenue. So just like a basic income, there are lots of details to be sorted out, and those should be sorted out in the legislature by elected officials.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about housing, and I believe like your party also proposed a good like housing plan. So what do you think? Like what should be done to tackle the housing crisis?
It's very riding specific. So in downtown Toronto, the city has a lot of housing stock of public housing, and they have their own architects and builders and managers. And that system of public housing that we have includes co-ops. Uh, there's a lot in downtown Toronto. Toronto has a lot of housing stock that is public, and Toronto has a lot of public property that is Toronto city owned, where houses could be built. And so in my writing, our platform calls for increased funding to Public Housing Authority, Toronto Public Housing Authority, so that they can continue their work. A lot of that public housing stock needs a lot of repair and upkeep, but Toronto Public Housing is building a lot of new housing. So Moss Park, uh, um, semi high rises, mid levels, et cetera, et cetera. Other ridings face different challenges with housing. Um, and our party platform speaks to those challenges. But in terms of Spadina-Fort York, downtown Toronto, um, the the engines are both the city, province, and developers. Developers in downtown Toronto are leading the way in terms of building housing, uh, a lot of high rises, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to make sure that those are compatible with the community that we live in and not being built simply for investment purposes. So
Mm-hmm.
we need to increase the share of rent-controlled units in new buildings. We need to increase the size of those units so that they're 3 and 2 bedrooms, so families can live there. The problem with my writing is, well, we experience homelessness in an urban context,
Mm-hmm.
uh, for sure, but a, a lot of people are saying, we just can't afford to live in Toronto anymore. We want to. And more people are saying, we don't even want to live in Toronto anymore because the services are just too ramshackle. Can you imagine someone in New York saying, I don't want to live in New York anymore? I mean, it's just not, we can't do that to the city, right? Or in Chicago, I don't live in Chicago, or London. I don't want to live in London anymore. Everyone who lives in London and New York and Paris say it's too expensive to live there, but they still want to live there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Toronto's losing its muscle and its its civic pride. It's a global city, and it's being treated, as if it's not even worth uh, participating in the election from the government's perspective. That they simply don't need our vote. But it's a structural problem, because responsible government in Canada is based on trust. It's based
Mm-hmm.
on when you're elected, you act in the interests of all Ontarians, not simply in the interests of those who elected you.
Mm-hmm.
And and Premier Ford is abusing that public trust. And he's looks like he's crossed a criminal line with the abuse of public trusts around the Greenbelt, where he commandeered the housing Ministry of Housing. Those civil servants who work there are supposed to be impartial,
Mm-hmm.
and he put his own people in to dole out Greenbelt lands. You know, just the way Trump is putting his own people, Elon Musk, in
Mm-hmm.
and taking over administrative agencies in the United States. It's the
Yeah.
same playbook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So we also have the crisis of healthcare. Like there is shortages of doctors, nurses, or other facilities member in particularly in health. So what should be done to have more doctors or nurses?
I just lost you, Sami.
Sorry. Okay.
I heard the last part of what I heard was more doctors or
Can you now hear me?
yes,
I don't know, like my camera, like I think the internet got slow, but I'm going to repeat
yeah.
my question. Like, so we have shortages of doctors and nurses and other healthcare facilities member. So what should be done to tackle down this issue and to have more doctors and nurses?
Hire more doctors and nurses, but make them employees of uh, public employees. So, you know, Doug Ford says he's hired so many more new nurses. He's he's hiring from the private sector, and he's relying on the private sector for nurses and private sector nurses. He'd love to rely on private sector doctors. He would love to dismantle the entire public healthcare system and allow doctors to uh, operate in the market and turn our healthcare system into a market-based system. So we need to hire more doctors, more nurses. Our green plan, you know, gets into a lot of policy details and costs them all out. Everybody needs a family doctor. Every pregnant woman needs an OBGYN. Uh, Families need childcare. Uh, Kids need school lunches across the province.
Mm-hmm.
We need to invest in our people. And we need to start caring for each other, and it clearly starts with restaffing our publicly funded healthcare system.
Okay. Yeah.
The priorities of the government are wrong at this point in time. Priorities of the government are privatization, protect protect Ontario. Ontario is not for sale. Those are the Ford government slogans. Well, Ontario has been for sale. He's been selling off our public institutions and our public assets, our public lands. Uh, and the way to protect Ontario is not to do that. The way to protect Ontario is to care for each other and protect ourselves and protect our economy, but also shift our economy away from fossil fuels toward a more green economy, uh, one that's much more adaptable, not only to tariffs, but to climate change. You know, it's Jasper, the city of Jasper burnt down. The Don River flooded. LA was on fire. You know, global warming is going urban. It's coming, and it's not simply wildfires up north. I mean, those are devastating, but it's hitting our cities now. So, and climate change is a product of how we organize ourselves economically. We need to shift our economy. We need to pivot to a green economy so we're prepared for floods. We're prepared for fires. We're prepared for extreme weather. And all that it's all connected, right? And so it's a challenging time, but it's a critical time. Canada needs to protect its sovereignty, but also pivot to face the new challenges, climate, geopolitical, economic, social, that are facing us now.
Okay, okay, yeah. And where do you stand with respect to immigration? It is a federal jurisdiction, but when those immigrants come in, so they will be dependent on provincial. Like if they comes in, so they will live in Ontario. If they move to Ontario, so what? So do you think there should be a cap on the immigration and also to refugees? How many can get in?
I think looking at immigration is looking at the wrong problem. I don't think immigration is the problem. Immigration is, in fact, part of the solution. Uh, it's how we receive immigrants once they arrive and what opportunities are available to them. So many doctors, engineers, scientists from other countries are now driving our Ubers. You know, the qualifications for foreign-based professionals to work in Canada are virtually insurmountable. Uh, I was, speaking of Ubers, I was being driven by a, a, a man from Kazakhstan who'd been here for 23 years. And he's a structural engineer. He built bridges,
Mhm.
and he's driving an Uber. And there are doctors, other professionals, architects, etc., who, due to their immigrant status, uh, aren't participating. And so, if we need uh, to rebuild our public institutions, a lot of the labor force that we have is already here. And so, I don't think immigration is a problem. And Canada has always been inclusive. Canada is founded on immigration. It's an Indigenous territory, and we're all immigrants on it. So I think it's really looking at the wrong end um, of the telescope.
So you think like the we have the cost of living or the housing crisis, it is not directly because of those immigration level. Like I mean many like people flood in the this country. Like we know like liberal changed the policy recently, but before the borders were open, like everyone could get in, and they are still looking to bring in more people. So so you think like it is not the problem at all.
No, I think it's appalling to blame immigrants for the rising cost of living in Canada. It's not the fault of immigrants that we have a housing crisis or a healthcare crisis or an affordability crisis. Um, they're experiencing the same crises we are, and they need assistance as much as we do. I mean, we're all they're here and they're part of Canada, and they're Canadian or they're becoming Canadian. So to blame them is uh, um, well, words fail me. It's just it's beyond an insult, but it's also baiting. It's immigrant baiting, and it's uh, immigration is not the problem. The problem is the direction the government has taken Ontario in the last 7, 10 years. It's gone down the wrong road. And look at the results. We don't have houses. We don't have a healthcare system.
Mhm.
Costs are skyrocketing. And now we've hitched, our wagon to a very unruly neighbor to the south, who is alleging to annex Canada and make it the 51st state. Canada, Ontario has been going in the wrong direction, and to blame immigrants for all of this is, it's cruel.
Mhm. Okay. Uh, okay. Thank you very much Patrick, for joining me on the Sami Parvez show once again. So, what's your message to your constituents? Why should they vote for you in this election on February 27? What's your message to them?
The Green Party has the most sophisticated set of policy recommendations of all parties. And in terms of my own candidacy, I was a law professor for 35 years. I taught public law, constitutional law, international law, human rights, and labor. And I've worked alongside labor unions and First Nations, both in court and in political arena. And I've been before the United Nations and represented governments both in Canada and abroad. And I believe I have the skill set to be an effective member of the provincial legislature at this critical juncture.
Okay, once again, thank you. I always ask this question to every candidate or political candidate with my guest. So is right now you are running as a green candidate, you never held an office, but usually those who held office or from like major party, you are the exception from green. They are, greens also declined my request, in the past election, and so I did not bother myself to sending request this time. So if you get elected, would you can you please comment? Would you be interested to appearing on the Sami Parvez show again?
Anytime, Sami.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate the invitation. Thank you for.
My my pleasure, sir, and thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you again on the Sami Parvez show. Until now, wishing you very best on your election campaign, and looking forward to seeing you the next MPP.
Thank you, Sami.
Yeah, my pleasure, sir. Thank you. Take care. Have a good
Take
one.
care.
Bye.
Bye bye.